I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are on the unceded traditional homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and to them we extend our thanks. I'm Michael Alexander. I'm the director of SFU City Conversations, a program of SFU City Public Square. I'm also a member of the Northeast Falls Creek Park Design Advisory Group and the Stewardship Group. And I want to say that 10 years ago when my family and I moved to Vancouver, one of the first things I did was to walk to the top of Falls Creek and look around at all the asphalt and those looming viaducts. And I thought, what a lost opportunity. And what an opportunity to be grasped. So tonight I want to welcome you to this exciting evening to learn more about the draft concept. And I want to emphasize draft concept because we're interested in your comments and your observations, as well as your questions, of a design for the park at Northeast Falls Creek. Our event is organized by the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation and the City of Vancouver in partnership with SFU City Conversations. And it's my pleasure to welcome James Corner and his group, James Corner Field Operations, the award-winning landscape architecture firm, to SFU Woodwards, and to have James present the draft concept design for the park and to engage in a conversation with you about the design. Now I'm going to turn the evening over to my friend Rob Bars from Modus Planning, Design, and Engagement. He's going to be the facilitator this evening. I get to relax and he does the heavy lifting. Rob?
Thank you, Michael, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Michael, and thank you for the amazing work that you do as part of City Conversations that really does help us to really enrich our dialogue around city building in Vancouver. So we really appreciate the work that you do. And Michael is also on the Park Design Advisory Group and on the Northeast Falls Creek Stewardship Group. So he's very involved in tonight's work. My name is Rob Bars. I'm a principal with Modus Planning, Design, and Engagement, and I'm part of the consulting team, which is led by James Corner Field Operations, and I'll be your MC tonight. So I'd like to recognize we have a number of Park Board commissioners here tonight. We have the Park Board Chair, Michael Wiebe. We have Commissioner Casey Crawford, Commissioner Sarah Kirby-Young, and Commissioner Catherine Evans. And I think that's it. Great. Thank you. I mentioned that Michael is part of the Park Design Advisory Group, and this has been a stalwart group that's been involved in the work right from the start and have met really every month for almost a year now and have done incredible work providing advice to the team and giving us guidance from a local perspective. So could I ask the Park Design Advisory Group members to stand up and be recognized? I know there are some of you here. Yes. And in addition, there is also members of the Northeast Falls Creek Stewardship Group here tonight who has also provided advice into the park design, but also into the broader area planning process. So if any of you are here, could you stand up and be recognized? Thank you. And of course, they're all doing their work on a volunteer basis, so very much appreciated. So following these introductory remarks, the main billing will be a presentation from James Corner, and he'll talk for about half an hour about the emerging concept for Northeast Falls Creek Park. So we're really looking forward to that. After that, we're going to invite you to write your comments on those little postcards that you received when you registered. So if you have either a question for our panel or you have a comment or general observation that you'd like to make, please write it down, and then we have a number of floor runners who will collect the cards, bring them to me, and I'll sort through them and we'll direct them to the appropriate panelist. So be thinking about that as you're listening to James speak. First off, though, I just want to show you where we are in the overall process and what we've heard about the park to date from the public and from a number of different stakeholders. So I hope you can hear me okay. So we're in the middle of a three-stage process. The first stage was really analysis and early directions, kind of looking at the context of the park, looking at some early background studies, really getting a feel for what this park's about and hearing from stakeholders and the public about what are the early issues and ideas for Northeast Falls Creek Park. So now we're in this stage two, actually coming towards the end of stage two, which is concept design, and James will be presenting a conceptual design for the park tonight. And we're almost at the end of this process. On Saturday there is an open house and street party on Carroll Street from 11 a.m. until 7 p.m. And so we hope you'll also come to that and see not only the park design, but also the emerging Northeast Falls Creek area plan. So we're close to the end of that, and so then we'll take all of that information, summarize what we've heard in stage two, and then we'll go into what we call schematic design, so the next level of detailed design, and that process will finish towards the end of this year. So in stage one, we had a number of stakeholder workshops. Many of you were probably there. We engaged about 1,000 different people through a Park Day open house, another series of open houses about the area plan. We had another presentation that James came and did for about half the number of people here tonight. And we also made a couple of videos of that presentation and also a whiteboard animated video. So we engaged over 1,000 people in the first phase of the work. And we heard a number of important things in that first phase of work. The first is it should be a very distinct park. It should be a distinct destination that has a unique identity, that has innovative elements that are not seen in other parks in the area, and it's to a certain extent a destination as well as a local community park. It should be authentically Vancouver, so it should be created with residents in mind. It should celebrate the history of the site, honoring First Nations, and it should have spaces that create a sense of belonging and a shared gathering spaces for all people. It should be a community park, so it should be open, safe, and inclusive, with strong physical and historical connections to diverse cultures and the neighborhoods surrounding it, and it should welcome users of all ages and abilities. It should be flexible, so it should have both passive and active spaces that can be multi-use, and spaces that can be manipulated for different programs. And it should maximize programs to allow them to easily change between day and night and over the different seasons. It should cultivate a feeling of trust and ownership. And it should be diverse and healthy, so it should bring people closer to the water, creating accessible ways to experience the waterfront and ensure an ecologically resilient waterfront. And finally, it should incorporate diverse natural elements that represent the coastal ecology of the area and create visually rich spaces. So those were some of the things we heard in the first round that we have tried to incorporate, and James and his team have tried to incorporate in the plan that you'll see tonight. So for stage two, we've had a number of meetings with the Park Design Advisory Group that we recognized earlier. We had a stakeholder workshop in April where we invited different stakeholders to look at the emerging designs and had a really good workshop and got some great feedback. We've met with the 15-member Urban Aboriginal Peoples Advisory Committee, and actually we're having another meeting with them tomorrow, as well as meeting with the representatives from the 3 First Nations, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. And then tonight, we have almost 350 of you here tonight, so really appreciate the great turnout. So you will continue to help us, I'm sure, shape and craft this plan for this incredible park. So as I mentioned, tomorrow there's an open house block party from 11 a.m. till 7 p.m. and it's located on Saturday, Saturday, June the 10th. Don't show up tomorrow. And so this is on Carroll Street, just at Andy Livingstone Park. So we hope you'll join us for that. There will also be a survey that launches on June the 9th, on Friday, so you can access that at vancouver.ca /NEFC. And as part of the block party, Michael and I think a couple of other people from City Conversations will be leading walking tours starting at 3 p.m. So if you're interested in a tour of the area and some insights from folks who know the area pretty well, then if you show up at the block party at 3 p.m., you'll be able to sign up for that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Michael Wiebe, who's going to introduce James. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I guess we should say hello to everyone. This is a very exciting time as Park Board Commissioners. We have 4 here, and there's a reason why we're all here. This has been a big process. Everyone saw the green lights that were on those towers behind us, and we know that this is a park that we've been waiting for. It's something that the commissioners wanted to be unique, exciting, but also have that Vancouver feel. That's why we're very excited to bring in an expert that's coming in and has done the High Line in New York, has done the waterfront in Seattle, but also working with PWL that's done Habitat Island and Hinge Park right across the water. So we're bringing kind of that local feel to create that connectivity that we want to see in False Creek, but also that wow and amazement that we're going to see from an international player. Someone who's been traveling around the world, so we're going to have to give him a big round of applause when we do introduce him. He's just been around 7 different countries in 10 days or something crazy. So this is someone that's been doing projects around, knows the best practices of what creates a really unique park. And yet we have a great local group from PWL that's really making sure that it's a Vancouver park, because our parks are unique to us. And as we continue to densify and continue to get the new towers, we need to make sure we have green space and access and different usage, but we can use them in the same park. And this is what this group is trying to do. So without further ado, James, I need a big round of applause from everyone in here. Welcome, James Martin.
Thank you. These introductions are always very embarrassing. They're way overstated, but thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here again in Vancouver. I've been coming on and off to Vancouver over the years, and since we were engaged on this project since October, I've been coming much more frequently. And it's a city that leaves a very strong impression. This slide is great in terms of just encapsulating this sense of just very, very big scale nature. Not simply nature as greenery or even water, but nature as pure atmosphere, just pure weather, sitting and engaging the mountains and the topography and the vegetation and the water bodies and the people that live here. It's also a very successful residential city. A lot of people live in the cities. Now that might seem obvious to you, but in most American cities, they've struggled to be able to retain a good, diverse range of neighborhoods and different types of community that create a rich city. So I think Vancouver is an enormous success story in terms of being able to build a city that's not only about office buildings and commercial life and shopping and markets and trade, but is also a place where people live and build rich neighborhoods and a rich quality of life for themselves. You can also see in this slide, just there, is our site. In a sense, you know, this has been central Vancouver, but with all of the movement in these various neighborhoods over here too, this is now becoming the new center of Vancouver, the new center of the city. And then the third thing that captures my imagination about Vancouver is just the informality of how people use public spaces. This isn't Paris, it's not London, it's not New York, it's not even San Francisco, which has a different sort of relationship to public space. There's something here where very large-scale natural settings just meet the city and meet neighborhoods, and people have a loose, casual, informal, relaxed attitude towards how they use public space, which I think is peculiar to Vancouver. And these are things that we've tried to pick up in our thinking about False Creek Park. A sense of big nature, a sense of relating very closely to neighborhoods, to community, to people that live nearby, but also a sense of being able to have a relaxed and informal relationship to public space. And one other slide, just capturing the tactility of weather, and of course the super micro tactility of just the smallest things that leave a strong impression in terms of your experience and your sense of place. So with that in mind, we have a great team led by field operations, and James Denyenhuis is with me from my office. We're working very closely with the local landscape architecture firm here, PWL Partnership, that have had a lot of experience designing and building some great waterfront projects here in Vancouver. With Modus, you just heard from Rob, Moffat Nickel for engineering, and a variety of specialist consultants offering local expertise on a variety of subjects, from ecology to lighting to public art and so on. This map shows the variety of neighborhoods that surround the site, from Yaletown, of course Northeast False Creek, but also the Central Business District, Crosstown, Gastown, Chinatown, City Gate, False Creek Flats, and Southeast False Creek. All of these neighborhoods bear a relationship to this site, and we have spent the good part of the past few months meeting with the various community representatives and the various neighborhood groups, the various stakeholders that live in these communities. And it's really important to recognize that these are very diverse communities, very different. They have different expectations for what this park might be. They have different ideas. And I think that kind of richness of neighborhood spirit and diverse ideas for this place is important. Let's just introduce you to some of the characteristics of the site, because it's important to understand that this site has a number of opportunities, but it also has significant challenges. Firstly is just the configuration and shape of the site itself. You can see how the white outline here and the relationship of the site to the water body. The water's edge itself, if you could walk just around the East Basin, is 2.3 kilometers, which is a significant experience. There are some very large buildings here which give the site a particular iconic character. The stadium, the Rogers Arena, the Science World. In pink are a number of developments. These are developers that are building new neighborhoods, mixed use, a lot of residential, but on the bottom is retail and restaurants and cafes and some commercial uses. So these are massive differences, bringing new life, new people, and new vitality to the area. These are the probably three most significant connections into the site: Georgia Street, Carroll Street, and Quebec Street forming that edge. And related to those streets are then a variety of cross streets, which in a sense are the major points of entry into the site, and tying or literally connecting the neighborhoods, the buildings, the people who live here into the new park. This pink line here indicates the new Pacific Boulevard, which is partly what's instigating this project, the tearing down of the viaducts and the rebuilding of an at-grade boulevard. And this is Pacific Boulevard that will be built once the viaducts come down. And in the blue line here, you see the rebuilding of the Dunsmuir connection. We're now calling this the Dunsmuir Elevated Park. This will be an elevated walk that begins in the city near the SkyTrain, where primarily for cyclists, but also people who are walking. And as you enter the park, it will ramp down and bring you down to meet grade. This pink network shows the network of bicycle paths. Vancouver is a great city for cycling. There's a very strong cycling community here that are very vested and interested in how the bikeways will continue to work. The site itself benefits from a great south exposure, which is significant in terms of just looking out at the afternoon sun and looking towards the western sun into the evening hours. And there are great views from the corner of the site looking diagonally down the creek, which gives you a great long view. You're not just having these oblique views across the water body, but you enjoy these longer views that are diagonal along the creek. And of course, the views out to the mountains. This is a typical view looking across the park today, to the viaduct across to the mountains, or looking the other way on the long axis of the water body towards the bridge. So with that, we had a set of early directions that led to a variety of discussions with the various communities we've talked about. Thinking about the park being primarily a community-oriented park with a variety of community-oriented amenities, to being more of a nature park with a variety of nature and environmental experiences, to more of a destination park where the park would be attractive to a variety of people from beyond the immediate neighborhood who might be interested in a park that supported a variety of arts and culture and performance events. And related to that is the idea of public art, the opportunities here for artistic expression. That led to a variety of conceptual studies where we looked at the park site today in plan. This was an early sketch that had a kind of a community park emphasis. Emphasizing a variety of spaces that would accommodate community uses primarily. This diagram was really about a destination park which optimized connections, drawing people into the park, gateway type experiences with a variety of larger scale landscapes for larger scale events. And this sketch was really emphasizing a nature park oriented around the waterfront and dramatizing the pull and the push of the land meeting the water and waterfront type experiences. All of that went through a variety of meetings and discussions, and eventually it led to where we are today with a concept design. I want to reiterate that this is really what we'll call a draft concept design. It means it's really a sketch. It's the beginning of a set of ideas. We've shopped these ideas around the community and a variety of other interested parties over the past few weeks. We've got a lot of good feedback and a lot of enthusiasm. So depending on what we hear tonight, we'll know how to keep steering the ship and how to keep giving this shape and detail and intricacy that is meaningful to all of you. The first thing we wanted to say is, I know we have this property line around the park, but we wanted to say before we start looking at the park, let's look at this in its entirety. Because the water body itself is really significant. Let's look at the water body itself as a park, not just the property line that's defining False Creek Park. And in particular, let's look at the whole of the water's edge, that 2.3 kilometers of water's edge, that's creating such a rich variety of waterfront experiences today. From some fairly natural experiences where you can get down onto beaches, to some really interesting urban and social situations where you can meet friends or have a variety of experiences around the water's edge. So this diagram here just shows a variety of some of the existing conditions around the water body today. And you see in this image here all of the different waterfront experiences that I think are very rich and provide a great deal of variety in terms of how people can relate to the water's edge. So the first move, or the first thing we thought of, was to try to position 4 large landscapes that are really the big eventful landscapes, the open and the flexible surfaces, let's imagine them as lawns for now, that are oriented on the long axes of the water body that really draw you towards those long vistas along the water, and also orient you to the afternoon sun and also to the evening sun, when most people are coming out to use the park for either recreation or for events. And then secondly, in between those large landscapes, let's try and pull the water in and create a variety of inlets where you can actually get down to the water. And let's tie those 2 moves, the big landscapes and the water inlets, together with a single promenade that's a meandering promenade that actually lengthens your duration of experience and takes you out over the water and then back inland and then back out over the water and then back inland, so that you have this folded, meandering experience that lengthens and diversifies how you experience the water's edge. And that seen in total begins to unify or pull together the 2.3 kilometers of the Eastern Basin waterfront. The second big move is to look at Carroll Street and the importance of connecting Carroll Street to the waterfront, especially given that we'll have a new Pacific Boulevard that's going to be a pretty big boulevard. It will be tree-lined and it will be majestic, but it will still be challenging for pedestrians. And so how do we create a strong connection, pedestrian connection, along the Carroll Street axis? How do we also ensure a strong connection from the central business district along the Dunsmuir elevated skyway or the elevated park that will bring cyclists and pedestrians down into our new park? And how do we create a web of pathways and connections with strongly defined entrances? Each circle with an E on this diagram is an entrance into the park. In other words, how do we maximize porosity, make sure that all of the edges of the park are welcoming and inviting, and they have a strong gateway definition? We have as many entrances as possible, and once you're inside the park, a variety of paths and journeys around this space. And one of those is the bicycle, the Seaside Greenway. And here we show an idea to bring the greenway into the park and out to the waterfront on the western side, but then to pull it into the park in order to open up the waterfront and give the waterfront more of a pedestrian identity in the center. And you can see in the little image there, the photograph, this is something that you already do in a lot of your parks already. You pull the cycle tracks back from the waterfront so that the waterfront can enjoy public spaces and pedestrian activity. The cyclists can enjoy free mobility, and they still have long views and vistas across the park and out to the water. And then within that diagram, create a variety of rooms for a variety of programs and a variety of amenities, from gardens and interactive spaces to lawns and meadows, sports areas, etc. There are a number of small buildings we're proposing. The A&L Pavilion is a covered area for the skateboarders. The Creekside Pavilion will be a sort of visitor orientation space. And the Dunsmuir Pavilion will be a small food and beverage, a small cafe, and a park canopy that I'll describe in more detail. And then there's a really biodiverse tree canopy that ties and connects everything together. Some of the trees are organized as allées and bosques and have a very strong edge-defining characteristic. Some of them are organized as very natural groves and stands of trees. There's a number of specimen trees that we want to have to create more of an arboretum type feel in some spaces, and a stand of flowering trees for seasonal expression. And at the landscape level, we have lawns, meadows, wetlands, buffer shrub planting layers, and a variety of other typologies in order to ensure a really rich and robust garden-like set of landscapes. And put together, that creates the sketch, the draft concept plan that I'll walk you through now in a bit more detail. If you zoom in on the plan, you can see the two big lawns, the folded edge, the ribbon promenade that's meandering around. The new development parcels in this area is part of a private development, but we want for that development to interface with the park so that cafes, restaurants, retail activity is really feeding the edge of that promenade. The Great Lawn is seen as really the great gathering space. This is a lawn that can accommodate just a handful of people to throw down a picnic cloth and just have a picnic and spend some time with some friends, or to have a larger gathering, or to erect a large tent and have a particular community-oriented type event on a holiday. And it's really oriented on the long axis of the water, oriented towards the setting sun. We really see this as being the commons, the centerpiece of the park, where everybody knows that they can get together and relax. The creekside here is a smaller lawn that is on the long axis looking out across the water. This also has some meadow grasses around the perimeter, and again it's intended to be an informal gathering. The Creekside Crescent is related to what will be the new neighborhood, so it's a little bit more urban. We see this as having park-like characteristics with lawns, grasses, shrubs and planting, but also large pieces of furniture where people can just lounge and sunbathe and meet friends and have a coffee. Social space as that neighborhood meets the water. The intertidal marsh is this piece that we've folded into the land. We see this as being a very natural area where the water can ebb and flow given the tides. We can scallop the land in this way in order to create a variety of ledges. Each of the ledges can carry a different intertidal habitat zone, so it will have different grasses and support different types of bird life and animals. And it will have this intertidal quality because there is a significant tidal change in the eastern basin between low tide and high tide. So this is really a place that ebbs and flows and is really a very generous set of beaches and natural areas on a set of ledges that rise back up to the more formal park. But it's a place that we hope is a place of discovery where people can come and just experience a piece of intertidal nature. The other inlet is a little bit more formal and is oriented towards more people gathering and more social uses. We imagine it as being a set of steps built from stone, and those are sittable, so people can sit on these steps and look out across the water. And at low tide, the beach shows itself with logs and rocks and has a very beachy feel. But the steps also have a rocky quality to them as they step down from the upper levels of the park down to this natural area. And we want the beaches to have this rough, natural, found quality to them. So this view, you see the two inlets on the one side, the seating steps, the rocky outlets, the beach, and on the other side the more natural inlet and the promontory of the Great Lawn that's projecting out over the water with the axial view to the setting sun. If you step back, you can see how how the ribbon now is shaping these three landforms on the upper level, which are quite clean and available for community use. And then in the lower level, you have the intertidal landscape with the beaches and the terraces and the wetlands. And then there's the ribbon. And the ribbon is something that we see as being a great promenade, a place where people can stroll and rollerblade, but also have it richly furnished with lots of seating and different types of seating, some of it informal, some of it fixed, and different stands of trees and different types of landscapes that this ribbon moves through. But I like very much the idea that it moves out over the water and then it moves inland, and then it moves out over the water and then it moves inland, so that your experience is not monotonous, it's not the same, it's varied as you move around. We see the promenade as having a strong relationship to the water, stepping down to the water and being furnished. This is a quick sketch of one of the promontories along that ribbon, looking back to the city. The third element is the Carroll connection. Now, Carroll is a historical street of historical significance. We have earlier historical maps that show Carroll as really marking the beginnings of Vancouver. All of this land has been landfilled since to extend the city out over the water. Carroll is a really significant street to tie the community into the park, and yet it's challenged because of the new Pacific Boulevard, but also the metro rail line. So one of the things we want to do is to propose a pedestrian passerelle here, so that people can simply walk from the park into the Andy Livingstone Park and into the neighborhoods, or vice versa, from the neighborhoods into Andy Livingstone and connect across to False Creek. This diagram here just shows the graceful simplicity of the passerelle as it simply jumps over and avoids people conflicting with traffic. And this diagram in section shows the passerelle just going over the metro rail line and over the Pacific Boulevard. We see it as being similar in scale and character to, for example, the bridge at the Art Institute of Chicago at Millennium Park. If any of you have seen this, it's just a very graceful and beautiful structure. It really disappears, but it really is instrumental in facilitating pedestrian connection from one part of the park to another. And symbolically, we have this line. You could say it's a water-to-water connection because it connects the Burrard Inlet to False Creek. But actually, at an even larger scale, symbolically, it's connecting to the larger Ontario Greenway and to the Fraser River. So symbolically, we think that this is an important marker, not only facilitating people connecting into the park, but also getting in the mental map and the orientation to this larger Greenway connection. Another part of the where are we here? At the foot of the Passerelle is a plaza here that where we would like to see this as being a really interactive water splash pad sort of feature, a hardscape of stone with interactive fountains that people can play in and run around in, and really be family oriented. Something that's beautiful in terms of what it looks like and how these fountains and jets work, but also invite participation and invite interaction and invites families in particular at the foot of this connection. Another important component, running parallel to the Passerelle is this feature here, which is really a series of wetland gardens. And we want these to collect all of the stormwater in the park, would come into these wetland gardens, and then would the water in here would work its way over the stone terraces that we're building here to come down and leak out onto the beach below. And we want these to function in wet weather, of course, to collect stormwater, but to have a beautiful wetland garden quality in terms of their plantings, with irises and grasses that are really beautiful, but are also performing work in terms of improving water quality and providing an experience for people to simply sit amidst the wetlands, if you will, and be in a part of a landscape that's working to process and clean stormwater from the park. On the other side of the Passerelle, just here, we're thinking about a series of horticultural display gardens. You don't really have these in a lot of Vancouver parks, but you do have a tradition of great horticulture and great gardens. And we think that this is an opportunity to do something that brings color, a lot more variation by week and month, and is actually a feature that people want to come to the park, to stroll around the gardens, to look at different flowers and grasses, to learn about different types of planting, and to have a really kind of good old-fashioned garden experience. A place where you can also sit and take in a place of respite and a place of quiet in the context of an otherwise quite busy city. At the back of the site is the Dunsmuir Elevated Park that is coming off from the central business district here as a raised structure and then begins to grade down, down, down and touches ground around about here. In order to diversify some of the experiences on that linear element, we have a number of overlooks where you can get a raised view, a raised vista, and a stepped amphitheater here in this location where you can step down and come down to this lower level of gardens. And those steps are designed to be seating steps, so they will also function as a small amphitheater. So some of the overlooks, we've learned a lot from the success of things on the High Line, for example, where you step off the promenade portion of the High Line to simply take a seat and just look at the view and frame that view. Or another overlook situation here, for example. And this is just a quick rendering of what that Carroll connection overlook could look like. Because you're raised up, you will get elevated views across the park and across the basin. On the Quebec flank of the park, we see this as being really planted up as a buffer to keep the street out and to keep the park quiet. We like the idea that we could use Douglas fir and other plantings here that give an evergreen and a denser kind of quality to this edge, but also to embed in that planting various community facilities, especially oriented around play and children and families. Places for a small picnic, for a small play area, for a small seating area, etc. This area here will be a primary entrance into the park. Whoops, keeps flicking. Because of this location here in relationship to Quebec. This here will be a pretty major entrance for all of the communities over here to enter the park. And here we see a sort of a central gathering area, a space where people can enter the park, get oriented, maybe have a seat, maybe buy a coffee, and use this as a flexible sort of plaza-type space. We see it as being a lot like this in Battery Park City, where there's a small pavilion where you could buy coffee in a stand of trees that are pruned very high, so you see right through them to the waterfront. But there's movable tables and chairs underneath, and you have a very informal piazza-type setting. In this area, remember these will eventually be built up as buildings, creating the new neighborhood. But we've carved this area out as part of the public space of the park. And here we see an opportunity to create a covered space, a covered event space. If any of you know Director Square in Portland, it's a very successful space because this big roof keeps the space below dry during inclement weather. And there's a small pavilion underneath this roof where you can buy coffee. And then underneath are movable tables and chairs. But they can also use this space for programming, and they can have small quartet-type concerts or small events underneath the shelter of the roof. So in this location, we would like to see a sort of really strong architectural canopy that is weather protective with informal uses as well as potential program space underneath that roof in that location. And then over to Andy Livingstone Park on the other side of Pacific. This is the park today. This road that bisects the park today will be removed, so you begin to get a contiguous park. But you can see this red line overlay is the new Pacific that's being built. So there is a need to make some significant modifications to how this park works and how it ties everything together. So in this sketch, you see the Carroll Street Passerelle with a variety of gardens alongside the bridge, the two sports fields, the new skateboard park with a covered roof. We've jogged these sport fields in order to create a grander entrance into the park here at this corner, to have a stronger relationship to the Sun Yat-sen Garden Park as well as over to Chinatown. And then here we build a hill. There's already a hill here and a hill here, so instead of the road, we'll fill in the road to attenuate the hill, retain the existing new playground that's just been built, and strengthen the edges around the park and strengthen the connections. In this area, really we're retaining a number of existing features in here, but enhancing the plantings and enhancing the connection. In this area, carved into the hill, will be a variety of seating terraces that invite a small impromptu performance space here, as well as allow for spectators to view sports. The fitness and play, of course, there's sports fields, there's the skateboard area, there's a variety of play areas here for different age groups. The off-leash dog park area that's already there will be renovated and made a little bigger and a little better. And this is just a typical view of the characteristic of that park, flanked by trees for shade, movable tables and chairs underneath for informal gatherings, the covered roof over the skate park, or the amphitheater looking at the beginnings of the passerelle and the sports field beyond. So an aerial view, you're looking at the Sun Yat Gardens here, the soccer fields, the skateboard area, enlarged area here of parkland to create a much more generous and welcoming entrance. This portion of Andy Livingstone Park, which is oriented really towards the community. The passerelle going over Pacific and over the metro line. The new Dunsmuir connection for cyclists and joggers and walkers to come into the park. The park sort of welcome area with the pavilion. The horticultural gardens, the splash pad, the wetland gardens, the promenade around the flank of the new neighborhood with restaurant and cafe frontage, the ribbon that runs around the waterfront with the inlets down to the beaches and the natural intertidal areas. So in a fairly small area, I think we've packed a lot of diverse experiences. Some of them quite open and simple, and some of them more intimate and experiential. And this is just another big overview that just situates the park in the context of Vancouver and goes back right to what I said at the beginning, which because of the expansion of neighborhoods and development out from the central business district, we believe that this park will become, in a sense, the new central park, the new centerpiece, both symbolically and literally, physically, for all of the various neighborhoods that surround it. One more view, looking at the water and the edge and the mountains behind. And finally, I'm supposed to introduce the fact that now we'll have some panelists come and join me on the stage, and we will welcome, invite, and discuss questions that you may have. Thank you. You all right?
Yeah, so if you go and sit there and I will. Great, thank you very much, James. So as I mentioned earlier, each of you has a postcard from your registration. And so we'd love to hear your comments or your questions about what you've heard from James this evening, or if you have any more general questions about the park design process. So I'd like to invite onto stage 4 panelists, 3 to join James. So you've already had an introduction to James, and we have 3 other panelists. So Katarina Gomez. Katarina is the lead park planner for Northeast Falls Creek Project, and she has over 15 years of experience in urban design and public space design in Toronto and Vancouver. And actually, Katarina was instrumental in bringing James and his team, as well as the PWL partnership, to this project. We also have Dave Hutch, and Dave is the manager of planning and research for Vancouver Park Board, and he has over 25 years experience in parks and recreation and ecosystem planning and design. And Dave oversees the design and integration of the parks and open spaces of Northeast Falls Creek post-viaducts. and he really understands that this is the Park Board's most significant urban park project in a generation. And then finally, Derek Lee. Derek is a principal at PWL Partnership and a LEED accredited landscape architect with 20 years of experience, employing a passion and ingenuity in all scales of work. And Derek's ability is really one to quickly translate conceptual ideas into graphic form effectively to bring ideas to life. And if you have ever seen Derek draw, you will be quite amazed at how quickly ideas appear. So we have our four panelists. We have some floor runners. So if you have a question that you've completed and written on your postcard, please put your hand up. And then either Lisa or Michael will collect it and they will bring it down to Pascal and James, and will eventually get it over to me and I'll read the questions out. So to start with, I have a couple of questions though before we actually get to the questions from the audience. And so James, you did a very good job, I think, of describing the kind of prime location of this park. It's really at the emerging new center of Vancouver, I think you called it. How do you see the park connecting the adjacent neighborhoods that surround it and integrate with those adjacent neighborhoods?
Well, there was a diagram that we showed early on that is really important. I called it a web, and it really is a web of pathways that allow you to walk around the park. But importantly, all of those lines go to beyond the park. They reach out to every single street crossing from all of the various neighborhoods around. The addition of the Carroll Street Passerelle is an important connection. So that web isn't only about the pathways inside the park, it's also about how those pathways reach out and connect to all of the neighborhoods. Each of those pathways is intended to have a pedestrian crossing across every single street, most of them signalized, so that the pedestrian is always prioritized and always made to feel safe and welcome and invited into the park. The second thing, again, I mentioned it briefly, but if you look at what we're trying to do to the edges of the park, we're trying to give the edges a very strong definition, mostly with tree planting and with landscape. But in most cases, the trees are pruned high and lofted so that you can see into the park. So you have the double-sided character of very, very clearly defined edges that are green and very clearly signal the park threshold, but at the same time are porous and open and easy to transverse. I was driving in a taxi cab around London a few days ago, and Hyde Park is it always impresses me. But as the taxi cab was going around the perimeter of the park, it's an amazing complexity of very, very strong definition. You know exactly when you're going to cross into the park and when you're not in the park. They're very, very clear. There's no ambiguity. And yet at the same time, there's very clear sight lines and lots of opportunities to get in and out of the park along the way. So I think that's a lot of what we're thinking about here, that this is a very well-defined central park, but it's very open and connected and porous as much as we can make it at every opportunity.
Great, thanks. So we have a few questions here, but I'll kind of summarize about the size and location of the park. So I think we need to get this one out of the way early on so we're really clear, what are we dealing with here in terms of the park? So the question is, each time we come to a meeting regarding the plan, the amount of park space seems to change. Could you tell us how much park space is allocated and give us a concrete answer on where it will be?
Well, I'll take that one. And I do have a cheat sheet because it is complex. The accounting of park space is complicated. So Annie Livingston Park and the Skate Plaza, we're looking at about 11 acres of parkland that we will renew. existing parkland, so renewing all that parkland. Then we have 3.5 acres of existing Creekside Park, also north of Science World, that we would renew. And the new component is about 11 acres. So the new space of parking lot and road surface between the water and the SkyTrain up to the new neighborhood to the west is 11 acres.
So we have a question here about, are there opportunities for people to engage directly with this park? So for example, allotment gardens, nature stewardship areas, adventure, creative play, etc. So can people get directly involved in the park? James, you wanna say that?
I'll say something, then I would invite Dave and others to add. But you know, I think you've got to be careful with park design that you don't over-prescribe and over-program. So a lot of things we're showing are really suggestions of things that could happen in this park, and creating built environments that invite rather than prescribe. So could we design elements that can sometimes be furniture that people feel comfortable sitting and lying and lounging on, but at some other point in time that becomes a platform or a stage or an opportunity for a small market event. And I think this is very important, that we don't start to allocate spaces for everything and they become fixed and final. There are some things that, of course, you do that for. An off-leash dog park, a designated children's play area, horticultural display gardens. There are a number of elements that do have a very clear program, but there's lots of other areas in the park that we want to leave open to interpretation, to invite flexible uses, to be interactive, to be engaged with, but in a variety of ways and in an evolving way. So the park itself is flexible and evolving.
And maybe I'll just add, I think one of the things we know are Vancouverites are very interested in environmental stewardship. And I think this park, because of the kind of rich biodiverse areas that James and his team have really integrated in, there's an opportunity to get involved perhaps in some of the planting of those, environmental education, and even caring for those spaces going forward. We know people desperately care or want to get involved and get their hands dirty and enjoy the shoreline environment.
Great. We've got several questions about the character of Pacific Boulevard and what it looks like when it goes underneath the bridge, the new pedestrian bridge. So can you describe the character underneath the new pedestrian and bike bridge? And also, what could or what does activate the space underneath the bridge, if anything?
We're very careful not to call this a bridge because we want it to have the architectural characteristics of something very light and very elegant. And the example I showed you at the Art Institute in Chicago actually has a very, very long span, similar to the lengths that we're looking at here, but it's very narrow. It's not much more than 3 or 4 meters in width. And of course it's high. So it's light. It's not like you have an underside to this bridge. The bigger undersides that we're going to have here is the existing Metro Rail line underside, which is significantly wider and lower than the Passerelle. And we need to think about how that could be brightened up through lighting or through public art interventions to become more friendly as an environment. And also the new Dunsmuir elevated walk will also be lower and wider than anything we're talking about with the passerelle. So I would see the passerelle as something that just disappears in terms of your experience on Pacific. It's so high and narrow and lightly structured. And worry a little bit more about the spaces underneath the metro line and the Dunsmuir. Now, having said that, on the park side, we've already solved the problem with Dunsmuir because we're actually building earth all the way underneath it. So in a sense, it's incorporated into the land at that point. And the portion that goes further towards connecting into the central business district is something that we'll be coordinating with the developer and the architects for the development to make sure that that is integrated with the plaza and the public spaces there. So it is a little bit of a complex array of spaghetti-like lines in that location between Pacific, the bicycle paths, the way the metro line is raised and then it dips down and then it comes back up again before it runs along Quebec. The Dunsmuir walk in terms of being elevated and then ramping down and falling into the park. The passerelle going over that. It's an interesting assembly of lines, but I think it's perhaps an opportunity to do something with a park experience that you don't yet have in Vancouver, which are elevated experiences. So from the passerelle, because it's raised, the view to the mountains will be spectacular, and the views across the park and to the water will be spectacular. The Dunsmuir connection, because you're again raised and we're creating these overlooks, you'll begin to enjoy elevated views across the park and along vista lines into the city and across the creek that are really unusual and spectacular too. And even as a Metro Rail rider, on the Metro Rail going through the park now, the experience for the Metro Rail rider will be enhanced too. So I would view all of this as a complex urban situation, but there's actually, I think, a lot of opportunities for enhanced experience.
Great, and just quickly staying on the theme of the passerelle, will it allow or include cyclists as well as pedestrians?
I think that's got to be talked through and just debated. My own feeling is not, because there's going to be an at-grade crossing across Pacific at exactly that same location. And so the dedicated bicycle path system that I showed you the diagram for, that is always at grade, has an at-grade crossing at Pacific and goes into Andy Livingstone Park and continues to Carroll Street. So there's no need to continue bicycles along the passerelle, which is something that we would like to be, or I think, I would advocate for it being much more a pedestrian experience and not have to suffer from some of the potential conflicts with cyclists and pedestrians.
So we've got a few questions about water quality and swimming in False Creek. Can you tell us tell us about the water quality in False Creek? Tell us what the plans are, or any activities to clean up the water over time, and how could or should people interact or not interact with the water on the water's edge?
I think I'll take that one. I think certainly water quality in False Creek has been top of mind in the last little while, and it's certainly been a big part of our discussion because we know people are very keen to interact with the water. And I think we're really kind of taking our cues from the Olympic Village, Hinge Park, Habitat Island, and those kinds of landscapes. The approach that we've taken to park development there has had a much softer edge to previous False Creek park spaces, which have had more of a hard seawall edge. And we've managed to communicate to people that these are beaches, these are waterfront landscapes that are places for sitting, for watching, but not for going in the water. And we'll continue on that educational path. But as James showed you, the kinds of landscapes are very similar to that. In terms of we have high hopes for improving water quality in False Creek. We have both a biological challenge around E. coli from a number of sources, but we also have the industrial legacy of a chemical contamination and leachate that we need to understand better. And certainly other major cities have done a lot of work, and we're going to be looking at and how that's done. And so we've got a real focus on that.
I would just add that the linear wetland I described, I think could be a really fantastic signature piece of this design, because it's quite big, it's quite long, and it has the bridges, the footbridges will cross it, and it's a wonderful opportunity to have different types of grasses and irises and lilies, and just a wonderful sense of an aquatic garden at a very large scale. But the story that it can tell in terms of collecting the stormwater from the park and filtering the water slowly as it makes its way to the basin, and then the big rock ledges and terraces that fall down to the beach, we imagine water seeping out of those and having algae and lichens and mosses growing on those, so that the expression of water leaving the land slowly and disembarking into the bay, but now clean and purified, I think it's a beautiful idea. And it's being designed and made at such a grand scale. I think it could really be a signature part of the story of this park.
So staying on the theme of water a little bit, how will the landscapes and the park itself protect against flooding and extreme weather? And related to that, how will you incorporate renewable city sustainability and an overall focus on carbon reduction?
Well, the sustainability story is important, and it will continue to evolve. I think there's a lot of sustainability points in the project in terms of certainly with stormwater, with permeable surfaces, with the diversification of habitat types. I showed you a diagram in terms of planting types. Those aren't only intended for experience, but also for the types of bird life and the types of wildlife that those communities attract. So the kind of biodiversity mixture here, I think will be just extraordinary. With regards to sustainability, what was the question? Sea level. Sea level, right. The ribbon is designed to hold a new datum at 4.6 meters, which is like building a dam, if you will, to against the worst scenario for sea level rise, which is in the distant future. And the fact that ribbon moves inland and outland allows for tides, no matter what level they are, to come in and to come out, so that the edge has a softness to it that I think is again quite appropriate here. Instead of most of the other edges around the park, with the exception of Hinge Park, are quite straight. They're linear, and you walk in a straight line parallel to the water's edge. This folds inland and outboard, and it also functions as a flood protection line.
Great. And Michael's just sent me a note here that Michael is planning an SFU City Conversation on cleaning up False Creek. Lunchtime, Thursday, July the 20th, SFU Vancouver Harbour Centre, and that's with Councillor Andrea Reimer. So if you're interested in the issue of cleaning up False Creek and the water quality, a great one to attend. So July 20th at lunchtime. I'll remind you about that at the end. So we have a few questions here about kind of the social issues of the surrounding neighborhood and Andy Livingstone Park. As many of you know, there are issues of drug addiction and homelessness, and often needles are left in the park. James, can you talk maybe experience of other parks that you've designed where you've had to address serious social issues, and can you, through design and programming, help alleviate some of these issues in some way?
Well, that's a very challenging question. I get it. You get it everywhere. I mean, we did a great park in Santa Monica. But Santa Monica has a great climate for homelessness, and a similar park in Miami. And so, in these sorts of places, there's a lot of challenges with public space and how do you deal with issues of, both homelessness and other types of people who want to use those spaces for drugs or for alcohol or for whatever. There are a number of remedies. The biggest one really has to do with just how the park is regulated, how it's policed, and how it's maintained. And in Santa Monica, in the particular park I'm describing, the council took some pretty strong action with regards to how that park, how behavior in that park is monitored and policed, including closing the park at night time, so that at 11 o'clock it's closed. Nobody should be in it, and if anybody is in it, they're asked to leave. So policing, monitoring is a big one. The second one is what's called eyes on the park, or just having people in the park. A lot of these people don't want to be in a busy place. They're kind of there now because it's quiet, or because they feel that they're safe and no one can see them. So if you can create parks that have very clear lines of sight, very clear lines of visibility, that are surrounded by neighborhoods that have windows that look into the park, and what's called eyes on the park, as well as users of the park that are using it in a vibrant and active way throughout the day and throughout the week. This too can preclude this sort of bad activity. So there are challenges here, but my experience has been that through a combination of good design, good use and activity, eyes on the park, and proper maintenance and policing regimens, you can dramatically improve how the health and safety of the park feels.
Great. Few questions about the adjacent Concord Pacific neighborhood that you touched on a little bit. So a question about, have there been any attempts to integrate the design of the Concord development into the park as you've been doing your work? And then a comment, nice park, but what does it look like at full build out when all the building sites are full? So can you talk about the relationship of the surrounding neighborhood with the park and how you would like to see those edges evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite positive about the development because of the context. This is really a stadium site at the moment, dominated by a sports stadium. So there's no community there adjacent to the park. There are communities next to the park along Quebec and in Chinatown, but there isn't really a community in the park. And I think that's important, to be able to have eyes on the park and to be able to bring a vibrancy and a population to the park, to make sure that it's active and it's used. The developer, it's fair to say that we've been in discussions with the developer about how the development can have stronger relationships to the park. The fact that one of our ribbon lines has a strong arc-like geometry is something that they've reacted to in a positive way, because prior to that, the development was doing its own thing and oriented around issues that primarily they were concerned with. But when they saw our arc and our emphasis on a pedestrian promenade, they made significant adjustments to how the building footprints and the building massing would respond to that. They've also reacted well to our suggestion that that the ground plane of these buildings really promote restaurants, cafes, small retail, and bring activity to the waterfront. So that's a very positive thing. They've also looked at diversifying how people would move through their development in terms of alleyways and streets and pathways, and how it begins to feel connected to everything that surrounds it in terms of adjacent development. There's a lot more to do. Everything I showed you today is really a sketch design that will continue to take shape and will continue to evolve. And everything I've told you about what the developer is thinking about too will continue to take shape and continue to evolve. But what I can say is that we've had a fairly productive dialogue to date to try to ensure maximum integration and maximum interrelationship between the new neighborhoods that will be built and the interface with the park. I don't know if Dave or
I just
somebody
wanted
wants
to
to add to that.
Yeah, at the block party on Saturday, the landowners, so Concord, Canadian Metropolitan Properties, PAFCO, they will be there to present their own site plans. So I think it would be a great opportunity for those who are interested in giving feedback and learning more about it to come and talk to their design teams.
So because this is a city that loves its food, we have some questions about food and edible plantings and fruit trees and community gardens. Do you, Derek, could we ask you, do you have any thoughts about incorporating edible planting into a park like this?
Well, certainly food in Vancouver is a way of bringing people together, and I think it's an opportunity to sort of bridge the different aspects of communities and neighborhoods and think about this place as sort of a commons for the public good. You know, food has so many different layers in terms of whether it's public or private garden allotments, which, you know, could potentially be explored, but it also extends into the realm of the ethnobotanical and thinking about an array of different species of plants, edible native plants that could be incorporated into this site that really resonate with the historic way that this shoreline may have been used by peoples such as the First Nations that once inhabited this, and to really connect all of us much closer to the land onto which we've traditionally lived on. And I think especially when we think about a city of density like Vancouver, where many, many people, including families, who live in apartment dwellings, I think we need to provide those spaces where people do feel very connected to the land. And I think food production is a big part of that. Yes, there are some maintenance considerations. Yes, there are ownership considerations, particularly around allotment gardens. But I think that together with both the city and also partnerships with nonprofit agencies, urban gardening associations, and individual community members, we could probably make this happen.
So this is the penultimate question, and there's a few different comments and questions about First Nations, which you just alluded to, Derek. So questions about how have you integrated First Nations considerations into the park design, and what do you see as the opportunities for acknowledging First Nations culture, history, and the concept of reconciliation into the park?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're really at the beginning of a conversation with the Three Nations and with the urban Aboriginal community. It's going to take some time to figure out how we will do this. At this point, I can say that there's a general understanding that storytelling, somehow translated in a physical way, would be important. That it would be important to integrate some of that Indigenous planting in the landscape. That food, places of gathering, are extremely important to these communities. So both indoor and outdoor. So we are exploring a number of different possibilities. But it's going to take some time to understand what makes sense to them within the context of an evolving design. So tomorrow we'll have a couple of more meetings, and it's going to be about having a flexible approach and listening and making sure that at some point all of us can share this space, in a really simple and integrated way.
Great, and our final question for tonight is, what's the timeline for all of this? So how will the phasing happen? When will we start to see something actually happen on the ground?
Yes, well, if you listen to the news in the last couple of days, it's just a few months away. It's not really. So really, at this point, it's not totally in the city's control. The implementation, so we are right now designing conceptually the park. We are preparing an area plan for the entire neighborhood. These documents are going to go to council and the park board hopefully by the end of the year. And after that, there's a number of negotiations that will have to take place, agreements that will have to come to a resolution in the months after that. So 2018 will be busy legally, and if all goes well, then we can look at the beginning of the removal of the viaducts towards the end of the year, the beginning of the construction of the road network, 2019, 20, and the park will happen. Would happen 2020. That could be the beginning of the construction of the park. So, lots to figure out, and all within the control of the city.
If I can just add a slightly more jaded view, because I've been through this before. Projects like this, especially that are this complicated, because this isn't just a park project, it's also a streets and road building project, it's a development project, there's a lot of politics and economics and complexity and engineering issues surrounding this particular project. So, we can dream and we can draw up schemes that reflect the input that we've had. But I would encourage each of you that if you all have a good feeling about this park and you want to see it happen, to speak up and to be enthusiastic and to communicate that to the leadership. Because the leadership will inevitably change anyway. I mean, what is typical in cities is a particular mayor or governor or governmental group is supporting a project, and then the next group just has no interest in it and it dies. So these are complex projects. They're woven into a web of politics, and yet I view this really as public space. And so you, really, as the public, if this is an important project for you and something that you'd like to see sooner rather than later, then please, I encourage you to speak up and get involved with the parks and with the process, but become a supporter, because these projects can easily die as well as sometimes be made. And when they're made, everybody loves them and everybody wants to take credit for them, even those who were the worst skeptics and wanted nothing to do with them at the beginning.
I just wanted to ask one more question and provide the answer. The question is, how did we choose James Corner Field Operations? And we had great response to our call for proposals. We shortlisted down to 5 people, five teams. We interviewed all 5 teams in person. They came to Vancouver. They were all fantastic. And I think when it came down to it, the team of James Corner Field Operations and PWL partnership, there was just so much chemistry in the room, and we could feel it. And James himself, you know, this guy designed the High Line. He's from New York. He's the most down-to-earth, personable guy, and it's just been a wonderful journey that we've been with them, and the deep knowledge that PWL has brought in terms of they've been great partners with the Park Board in the past, designed many of our parks, and so it's been a great journey and a very successful one. So
Thank you. It's just the beginning.
yes.
All right, so thank you, panel. That brings us to the end of the evening. We got to most of your questions. We didn't get to all of them, but we will enter those into the public record. They'll be part of the summary of public engagement that we produce at the end of this phase. And as James has alluded to, we're really not at the end of the process here. We're still only 2/3 of the way through. There is a more detailed design stage to come, so there will be other opportunities, perhaps even other lectures that James comes to, but certainly other public engagement opportunities, including the block party and open house on Saturday. And of course, there is the survey I mentioned that will open on Friday, June the 9th. So please continue to provide your very important and great feedback into this overall process. And I want to thank the panel very much, and James especially, for your presentation, and thank all of you for showing up tonight. Really appreciate it.